Welcome everyone to this Science Cafe on scientific literacy. This is a topic that is very much to my heart, and for this occasion we have a speaker that really does not need any introduction, and all of you know him very well, Professor Kari Enqvist from the University of Helsinki. It's a great honor and pleasure to have you here. I remind you briefly the typical way in which Science Cafe works. First, Kari will talk for about half an hour or 40 minutes, hopefully 40, the more the better. After that, we will have the question and answer session. This is what we generally do. However, if you have questions while Professor Enqvist is talking, you are very welcome to just raise your hand, and we will. He is happy to have discussions while he's having his presentation or his talk. Then, after the question and answer session, you will have the chance, if you want, to ask him personally questions. So we will hang around, most likely in the other room, because this is will be booked until only 5:30, so then we will move there. But we will be here, and we will have a drink, and whatever you want to ask him, he will be happy to discuss with you. Well, thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. I shall be chatting about what is true and what is not true, and what sort of a time we're living in now. Truth is something that has kept, the question of truth is something that has kept philosophers occupied for centuries, if not millennia. So I'm not a philosopher, so I'm not going to really discuss philosophy, not going to argue with anything that the philosophers might have said. And in fact, one philosopher friend of mine has said that to argue with philosopher is like struggle with pigs in the mud, and after it's only after a couple of hours that you realize that the pig actually likes it. So I'm not going to do that, but I'm trying to sort of give you a rather personal view of some things that presumably occupy us all when it comes regarding the way information, knowledge, truth, and such things are treated in the media and elsewhere. So let me just say three things that you often hear rather often in the context of evolution, but this is something that pertains also any other discussion when you try to sort of settle the question of why we think something is true, why science is efficient, and so on. And there are so three kind of sentences that you often hear, and one of them is that when you express an opinion, let's sort of keep the evolution in mind, because that gives us a focus. So you often hear people to say that it is just a theory. It is just a theory, and all of these three sentences to me always reveal that the speaker does not really understand what he or she is talking about. But this is something that you hear often. It is just a theory. And I think one needs to understand that for people, for the layman, a theory just means an opinion. It is an opinion. I have this theory that tomorrow it will rain, and I have this theory that maybe the universe did not arise in a big bang, but there were billions of little bangs, and so on. But for scientists, a theory means something more. It is something which is a very large concept. It's not just an opinion. It is something that in many ways now will be linked to stuff that I will be discussing. This sounds rather prophetic and strange, but I hope you'll walk with me on this one for a while. Then, so it is just a theory. Then another, this kind of expletive is that it cannot be proven. Evolution is just a theory. It cannot be proven. Now, the question, I mean, these often come from people who couldn't prove anything, even if their life were to depend on it. But there is a sentiment that there is a way, that there are science has to prove things. That there must be a proof, for instance, of the fact that the Earth orbits the Sun. Now, is that proven or not? Can it be proven? I mean, there are people who think that the Earth is flat, and there are all sorts of people. We don't really need to go into that in detail. But do you think that it has been proven that the Earth orbits the Sun? Let's raise the hands. Who thinks it's been proven? No, it's not been proven, of course. I mean, who could prove? And what does it mean to prove? Mathematicians prove things. They prove that 1 + 1 = 2 and such things. But of course, in physics, in natural sciences, all those things that have to do with observations, there is no proof in the mathematical sense. There is very, very high probability that the Earth orbits the Sun, and we can't even probably evaluate how high it is, but still it has not been proven. And why we believe that it has been proven, that has to do with other things. I mean, all those observations about the solar system and so on, that's one aspect, but that is only one aspect. And I'm not going to discuss now about observations and scientific experiments. I'm trying to sort of go a bit deeper and ask, why do we believe, and why should we believe that the Earth goes around the Sun? To the extent that this is Earth going round the Sun around an elliptical orbit, or approximately elliptical orbit, is what I would call a practical truth. Is this the truth in some practical sense? But it's not something that can be proven. Now, so that's one aspect. It's just a theory. It cannot be proven. Nobody has proved it. And this comes from the people who believe, well, let me just say the third one. The third one is that there has been no one about evolution, that, 3 billion or 4 billion years ago, there was no one to see how life began. There was no one to see the Big Bang. It is just a theory. It has not been proven. There was nobody who saw it. And now, and as I said, this is often from the people who would take an offense if you said that the idea that Jesus was a son of God and has risen on the third day is a truth. And if you say to them nobody was there to see it, it has not been proven, it is just a theory, they would take an offense. And this just shows that these are words that do not really have any epistemic strength. They are sort of emotions that express something else. But that's a different thing. So let's see Earth going around the sun. Has somebody seen that? Has there been somebody who has seen that? Hands up who has seen it. Now you become suspicious because I tricked you already once.
That means we've seen it. Okay, we've seen from TV, for example, from...
Yes, that's a good question. What does it mean to see? What does it mean to see? Now, I mean, how many of you...
Well, if you want to see it, you'd have to be outside to see the sun going around, but can it count if you can see the stars, how they act like, for example, how do you define parsec?
Isn't that just a theory? Yes, of course, there's been nobody who has been outside the solar system and seen it by his or her own eyes, as people think seeing something means. Nobody has seen it. And I just, this is a nice opportunity to remind you that what were the reasons that convinced people that, let's say Kepler, essentially. I mean, there were people who postulated that the Earth is going around the sun, but the people who actually then made the observations, made arguments why this is so. I mean, like Kepler. Now, none of you, not even I, could go outside, and if we were to see the sun, I could give you no arguments as why the sun, which manifestly moves as we stay standing there, why is it actually the other way around? And I don't know if you know what was the smoking gun, really, the observation that convinced people like Kepler that actually the Earth goes around the sun. And that reason was that observation that together with the theory, and now I'm getting sort of closer to what I'm trying to say, together with the theory of a certain model for the solar system, this observation made sense if the Earth were going around the sun. And that observation was that the planet Mars was 8 arc minutes away from the position that it was supposed to be. That 8 arc minutes is sort of a half of the size of the moon. So Mars not being there where it should have been, that was an indication that the Earth is going around the sun. This is a wonderful lesson in the history of science. Mars was not there where it was supposed to be. And 8 arc minutes, you can still see it by your own naked eye, and that was what was done by the last astronomer who made observations by naked eye, that was Tycho Brahe. He saw that, he made the measurements which then Kepler interpreted. So that's these 3 aspects. Let me say what I was wanting to say. So a theory cannot be proven, there is nobody to see it. Now, of course, the reason why we believe that the Earth goes around the sun are not just observations that Kepler made, but also other things, theoretical developments like Newton, who wrote a theory for just a theory for the motions of the heavenly bodies. But that was a great achievement, but the greatest achievement that Newton did was not just explaining the motions of the heavenly bodies, although that part got good press. But then there was the other part, which is the deeper part and more important. And that was that the Newton made the first unified theory. And I don't know if you know what he unified. He wrote down a theory that unified the heavenly motions and the earthly motions. He said all the previous centuries people have thought that heavenly motions are in a class of themselves. It's a motion that is pure, somehow godlike, whereas the motions in earth, around, or on the surface of the earth, in a sublunar sphere of things, these motions are impure, corrupted. They are corrupted motions, whereas pure motions are there in the heavens. And Newton said, no, they are the motions are the same. The apple falls for the same reason that the earth goes around the sun. And that's why it was called the theory of universal gravity. It's not just the theory of gravity, it's the theory of universal gravity. And now this is the trend that we have been following now for ever since Newton. We believe that the earth goes around the sun not because Kepler saw something, not because Newton wrote down a theory that could well explain the motions in the mathematical way, including the motion of the planet Mars. But we believe in this stuff because the fact that Earth goes around the sun is connected to billions of other things which we can also see. We see apples falling, we see the universe expanding, we see how bodies behave when they collide, we see how an arrow falls back to the earth, and so on. All of these are connected to each other, and somehow explaining one is not enough, but you need to have to really have faith in this explanation. You need to have a network of things that are all connected, and that's what modern theories really do. Modern physical theories, they connect billions of things in a fashion that you cannot take just one of them and say this is wrong. Because if you did that, you say that, well, I have a theory. I have my theory of how arrows fall. And now can you prove it that it's not wrong? And you say that, well, you show all sorts of hand signs and say that, why don't you go somewhere else? And the reason is not that it somehow I have such a great belief in my theory of arrows falling. But I understand that it is linked to so many links to many other things, that if I were to doubt that, I had to doubt everything. I had to doubt the motion of the earth around the sun. I had to doubt the expansion of the universe. I had to doubt the way the galaxies move, and so on. And this is the great strength of these modern theories, that to the extent that I can say that all the evidence that you can amass, all the evidence that you could show me that would say that Earth is not going around the sun in a let's say elliptical orbit, but it's going around some, I don't know, around peak here or some other place in an orbit that is rectangular, and you would say this is my theory, And I would say that I know that the fact that Earth is going around the sun has so many connections that almost any evidence that you could prove, almost any evidence that you could show to me are more suspicious than this fact that Earth is going around the sun. And that's why Earth going around the sun is a practical truth. It's something that I cannot doubt because I would have to doubt at the same time everything else. Now, all still with me, or somewhere in the outer space? Because now comes the hard stuff. I promise not to speak about philosophy, but I'll do it anyway. So there is a wonderful little booklet which I recommend to everybody by Ludwig Wittgenstein called Uncertainty. Philosophers make this distinction that there's the early Wittgenstein and then there's the later Wittgenstein, and as all men who grow a little bit older, they become more mellow and much more nicer. So was Wittgenstein also. The old Wittgenstein, or later Wittgenstein, was somebody who's now, I think, held in greater esteem than the young one. So uncertainty, he discusses of how can you know about things, and he has this wonderful, to me it's a wonderful example, and he asks himself, how do I know that I have never been to the moon? How many of you have been to the moon? How many of you know that you have never been to the moon?
I'm pretty certain I have.
You're pretty certain. But could it be that when you fall asleep, you somehow go to the moon? Could it be possible? Nobody has seen you there, that's probably sure, but how can we know? So Wittgenstein was asking, how do I know that I've never been to the moon? And of course this is a kind of stupid question because we all know that we have not been to the moon. But why we think it's stupid? And we think we've never been to the moon because it would contradict so many other things that we know about our life. The way we breathe, the way we need food, and the way the earth, the way everything on this earth is sort of built up, and how does it work? It would contradict everything. So if I were to believe that no, I don't really know if I've never been to the moon. If I did that, I'd have to be suspicious of everything else. Are we really in this room? A philosopher. Yes. How do I know that my parents were not huge insects? They looked kind of normal to me, but that was after I was born. Maybe they were huge insects before I was born, or whenever I got out, they somehow took their real appearance. But these are, of course, crazy questions. And why we think they are crazy is not that we've proven. I have not proven that I've never been to the moon. I cannot prove that my parents were huge insects. But still, I believe that they were not. And I think it's a fact of life that my parents were not huge insects, in the similar way that it is a fact of life that Earth is going around the sun. And now one needs to understand that facts of science are not different from the facts of life. Science is not some sort of a different way of knowing. It is exactly the same, and I could call this now a unified theory of knowledge. It is the same. We know about things in our immediate surroundings in the same fashion that we know about Earth going around the sun and things that we call scientific facts. Now, there really are no, and this is a misnomer also, a scientific fact. It's a misnomer because it somehow seems to imply that there are these facts of life, and then there are somehow facts that somehow fall into the realm of science, and they are different facts, but they are not. Science is just a method. And when you ask, how do I get these facts? How do I get to know that my parents are not huge insects, and you can all go and check that later. It is just you go and look, and you say, okay, that's how things are. Now, what we do in science is that we do the same thing. We go and look. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Then think that everything could be explained by science, or there is an explanation, because some people may think, okay, there are some things which actually science cannot even access, or some questions, I don't know, things related to how we think, or how we feel emotions. I mean, some people may think, well, okay, science can address certain problems, but not everything, not all facts of life. You know what I mean? And so therefore, you may say, okay, there might be something else which explains these things, and then.
Okay, let me answer you. Yeah, I don't think in that way. Let me say that first. The question is, what is science? Now.
Everything can be. If you think that everything, the way in which even how human consciousness or human feelings, whatever, everything can be explained by the science. Because if it is not, then.
But what does it mean, explained by science? What is this?
In terms of a scientific method, using a scientific
Yes, well, that's a different thing. I mean, science is just a method. It's a spade. It is just a spade to dig up reliable information. Now, it's not many hundreds of years ago when people thought that the best way to reach reliable information is listen to God giving sort of a descriptions inside your head. And even like 500 years ago, or maybe 600 years ago, people thought that that method is more reliable than making sort of observations. So if you see that things are in such and such way, but God's voice inside your head tells that, well, no, it ain't necessary, so then you think that, well, okay, God knows best.
Not 600 years ago, unfortunately.
600 years ago. Yeah.
It's today.
Well, yes, okay, that's right. There are still some people like that. That's for sure. But the method of science is just the same. Do the same thing as you would do in everyday life, but you do it more carefully and more precisely. So that's why we use mathematics, so as not to get sort of entangled in this web of meanings and so on, and not just saying that, well, it looks sort of a bluish. We say, no, let's measure the damn thing and see what sort of light it is emitting, and so on and so on. But it is in no way different from these everyday observations. And then if you say that in the world there are things that cannot be just reduced to everyday observations, then you say that it cannot be reached by critical thinking, it cannot be described by this kind of a method of finding how things are. And then you are, I think, discussing things that are different, like what is beautiful, what is love, and I would argue that things like what is beautiful, what is love, what is good, what is bad, they are not things that belong to the world, they belong to you. They are emotions inside yourself. When you say that here is a beautiful painting, and then somebody says that no, it's ugly as hell. I mean, this is something that you're not discussing really the painting, a physical object emitting a spectrum of light, but you're discussing your internal feelings. And whether those can be described by electrochemical means or not, probably not. That's a different question. So I think all those things that exist independently of ourselves, I would argue that they can be, to some extent at least, they can be explained. The explanation is a bit nasty word, but in some sense can be explained by a method which is founded on being critical, skeptical, making repeated observations, building a network of theories and observations, so to get this kind of archipelago of knowledge, which does not consist of separate islands, but something that is linked at this sort of some sort of a base that is there beneath the waves. So they are all connected, and I think the more they are connected, the more this knowledge that we call knowledge is connected, the more reliable it is. And as my example shows, that there we can reach truths that are truths in the sense that everything in our life would somehow collapse if we were not to call them truths. Italy exists. Yeah. It's the truth. Earth goes round the sun. It is a truth. And people who say that, well, the science does not really find the truth, they are changing their opinions every 10 years. This is not true. We do find truths, but it is, of course, a rare thing. But now we have two examples of truth. Italy exists. Earth goes around the sun, and now it's just a question of how many others they are. Which are they? That's a easy question. We leave that to young people. Let's see now. Any more questions? Yes, go ahead, please.
But still, truths are not absolute. So what you said is sort of the situation in normal science, but then you will have these revolutions in which all of a sudden all certainty is kicked in the ass. Like Einstein, who all of a sudden said that time is not absolute. And those theories in the beginning explain less than the normal science at that time. Like the theory of Copernicus explained significantly less than the Ptolemaios model. So how do you build that into the story?
Well, first of all, it is true that our viewpoints have changed in sort of I don't know if you could call them revolutions, but let's call them revolutions if you wish. But still, there are some things that remain. The fact that Earth goes around the sun has not been changed, and I don't believe it will be changed. Now, what Einstein did was changing a viewpoint a little bit, but from a practical point of view, what he did, he was saying that Newton is not correct. If you look observers who are moving close to the velocity of light, or if you are very close to gravitational fields which are very strong. So what he did, he changed things in the nth decimal, and now you can of course argue that yes, in a way, perhaps there was a conceptual revolution, and that is of course an argument that you can make, yeah, I don't think I can say anything very clever about that, but it's definitely is true that this is what happens, but still, and I think that's a physicist would view this transition from Newtonian mechanics to theory of relativity as a minor modification, whereas a philosopher who deals with concepts would say that this is a great leap, and that I think is something that we cannot really decide because it's a kind of a matter of taste. So I think that would be my view. It's not that, I mean, and I said there are no absolute truths. There are truths which are absolute in some practical sense. But of course, we can change viewpoints. Let me, for instance, I mean, lately, this, good that you brought this up, there's been some discussion I've seen, and I participated in discussions where philosophers claim that now you cannot say whether the Earth goes around the Sun or Sun goes around the Earth, because motion is relative. So you can't say which one is really moving, that Galileo was right. And interestingly enough, this is also a viewpoint that's been taken by the Vatican. They say that, well, we had this little disagreement some hundreds of years ago, and okay, we didn't quite treat Galileo the way we should have. But, however, those priests were really not so badly off, because later Einstein showed that actually you cannot say which one is moving. So it was just a matter of this kind of philosophical viewpoint. And now this is rubbish. But there is some questions there, perhaps.
Just a second. Use this.
So I started thinking that maybe it's like when there is this paradigm shift, it probably occurs because it answers a question that the old theory cannot. And once you move into the new theory, you start you can have questions, like more questions that the old theory cannot answer. Is that maybe one of the explanations why these shifts would happen, or also why it would appear that the old theory explains more when it hasn't been asking the right questions?
Well, I don't think you, well, I don't know. I think we are looking things at the retrospect, and all those paradigm shifts where the new theory was formed, and it actually then turned out it explains less than the old theory. It's not written in the history books. We throw that theory away. So the way we see the progress is we don't see those blind alleys. We only see the straight progress, the march of progress, which is a distorted picture of the science of history. Relativity, if you think of special relativity, it did not really explain anything more than the classical mechanics. There was no problem really to explain.
But okay,
Huh?
sorry.
Mercurius. The orbit of Mercurius.
Well, yeah, but it could have been explained in other ways. I mean, there were other explanations, like the planet Vulcan. You remember those guys?
And also, maybe if I can add a comment, very often if I think about quantum mechanics, for example, was born really because of some observations that, or experiments or ideas that could not be explained with classical mechanics. So it was really a generalization to new type of experiment, to explain new type of experiments. But of course, it doesn't mean that the classical mechanics was wrong. I mean, quantum mechanics should reduce the classical mechanics in the right limits. So very often they are sort of generalization of theories, which in any case do not throw away the previous theory, but the previous theory still holds in the limits in which it holds. Then you need to generalize it to include new, to understand different regimes, I would say. So, but then it depends on the theory you're talking about, whether it's special relativity or general relativity or quantum mechanics. I mean, generally, I think that it doesn't go in the way that the previous theory has to be thrown away necessarily, but it is just still valid in the region of validity where the theory actually holds. But okay.
And again, one could say that this now depends on whether you're a physicist or philosopher. A philosopher would see the transition from classical to quantum mechanics as being fundamental revolution in our conceptual. And to some extent it's true, but if you just think the early years when Bohr made his guess, it was just a guess how to solve this nasty problem, and it didn't really. It was in fact, the first quantum mechanics was semi-classical, and so. Yes.
Yeah. So I just have a sort of a comment to this, whether the sun goes around the Earth or the other way around. So. It's not really relevant, and it wasn't the biggest issue at the time, because the issue that it's not about which goes around the other, it's about whether the Earth is moving at all. And that's the big issue that caused a lot of problems, because people didn't believe that the Earth could move and people could stay on top of the Earth at the same time.
Well, my understanding is that, of course, there are still people who say that they can't understand this. But I think even 500 years ago, people could understand that Earth can move, and all the people will move with the same velocity, because they've seen ships on sea that move, and people who walk on those ships. So I think that was probably one aspect, but I think the real issue was not really physical, but it was kind of theological. Is the Earth the center of the universe or not? And for Copernicus, his claim was that because he was a Neoplatonic, he thought that the radiant sun should be the center of the universe. So there was this kind of a strange reasoning. So, okay, so how are we doing with time?
You're doing well.
I'm doing well. Oh, should I stop already? Or let me see if I can.
If you had more to say, we would be very happy if you would continue with what you wanted to say.
Well, maybe I try to wrap up. Let me just say that. So the point I want to make. This is. Oh, I should still say one detailed thing about this Earth versus Sun moving at this point, the discussions that people have had. And I said it's rubbish because people have not understood that the motion, the relative motion between the Earth and the Sun is not just motion that has constant velocity. They are forces in action, and you can show in a coordinate independent way that the center of the solar system is there within the sun. It's not exactly there at the center of the sun, but it is there at the sort of very, very close to the center of the sun. The curvature of the space is greatest in the center of the sun, and this is independent of any coordinates that you can think of. But let me just then finish and say I didn't really get to say anything about the modern times and President Trump. Now, the question is, and I'll just leave this hanging for your considerations, and that is that we often now here talk about living up sort of in a post-truth society, and of course there's been lies around already much before, centuries before, but I think there is something special about this time, and I think the question that we need to ask ourselves or our close companions is that why now? What is special about this time? Why now? Why not in the 50s? And I think the reason, there are multiple reasons. One of them is, of course, the internet that sort of gives us access to voice our opinions. But then there is, I think, a deeper thing again that somehow also contributes to this situation, and that is that in history there's been this continuing struggle between, which you could say, let's skip the Greeks and go to the Renaissance. So two bad things happened in the 14th century. One was the Black Death, and the other one was Renaissance. And there were scholastics, the people who sort of tried to reason about the state of the universe in the same way that the Greeks have already done, and they somehow are the forefathers of physicists. And then there came the Renaissance, who said that, well, I mean, it's not really interesting to look at the world because man is more interesting. It's better to study the man because man is, like Protagoras said, man is the measure of all. Of all things that there are, man is the measure of them all. And this is then a kind of a trend that has prevailed also until our days, and especially after the Second World War, there was this philosophical trends which we call by many names. Relativism is one of them. There were discussion that there are people can have different viewpoints and they are all correct. Postmodernism is one aspect of that, but and I think initially it was a reasonable observation because it started with ethics. Sort of, it was a kind of a struggle against this kind of a cemented Western thought that what is good and what is right, and people started to say that, well, maybe let's say the blacks in the United States also have a viewpoint which is equally valid as the middle class whites, and so on. This was the background, but then it sort of started to spread to other realms of life, and suddenly there were the so-called science wars in the 80s. I don't want to go into that. Some of you may have heard of them, and some of you might even remember them. But anyway, so this idea that all ideas are equally good, I think, made its way into schools and the way we educate our children. That it was not really good to say that you're wrong, no, you're wrong when you say that the Earth does not move around the sun. But it's an interesting viewpoint, but it's your truth. And suddenly we started to speak about different truth. We didn't talk any longer about opinions. I have this opinion that tomorrow it will rain, and suddenly it is my truth that tomorrow will rain. And somehow we've now all grown to that, so that this has formed some sort of undercurrent in the Western society, industrialized Western societies, that it is democratic, it is correct to have different points of view, and all those points of view are equally good. And now this clashes very much with science, because science is not democratic. All viewpoints are not equally good. All theories are not equally good. All observations are not equally good. But now we learn or teach our children to say that yes, your viewpoint is equally good as anybody's, and somehow these people grow up and they become presidents of United States. So, but perhaps I'll stop here and we can have a more discussion, if that's okay.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there will be many questions. When I say so, yes, there is already one.
Okay, this is a little bit more technical question, but I want to ask you this question. So you are saying that when we see something in ordinary life, then we want to explain it, and in science we do the same thing. It's just more precise and more systematic and so on, and I like it to think about it like that. But then in theoretical physics, we have also things like, let's say, string theory. And I want to ask kind of how you see theoretical physics. Are all branches, subfields in a solid basis? Do they fit into this kind of idea of seeing and explaining, or is there also more speculation that you would say this is not really so much science as other parts of physics?
Well, that's, I mean, the first rule of thumb about theoretical physics is that most of it is rubbish. I mean, and most of it does not really stand the test of time. But we want to do it, and we need to do it because we don't know which parts are the valuable ones. So, of course, there is a wide spectrum of theoretical physics, and some of them are sort of more reliable than others. What Sabrina does is more reliable than
For sure,
what string theorists do. String theory is about the sort of moderns. They are modern scholastics in a way, but it's I would say that let hundreds of even billions of flowers grow, and we'll see then. It's impossible to judge which one is good.
I think, again, I have a comment related to that is related, perhaps one of the main criticism thinking about string theory is that there is no way to even think how to make an experiment, because if we think about the scientific method, it's heavily based on the fact that you make experiments, make observation, and you see if they agree or not with the theory. And I think thinking in terms of string theory, I mean, at the moment at least, it's not something that can be, in many cases, experimentally proved. But at the same time, even when quantum mechanics was born, many things were like these Gedanken experiments or thought experiments that people, even the founding father, thought could never be proven. I mean, Schrödinger did not believe that we could experiment with single atoms, and then it just happened. So I think it's a comment related to what Teiko said, and I just wanted to say it.
Well, in the 19th century, people said we will never know what's inside the sun, or what do the stars, what do they consist of. But of course, then came the spectral analysis, and now we we still don't see inside the sun. There's nobody been there to see it. But still, with great confidence, we understand how the sun works. 1931, Wolfgang Pauli got an idea that some of the discrepancies that you see in beta decay could be explained by an invisible particle carrying away the energy. And Pauli said that we will never will be able to see it. And it took only 25 years when the neutrino was first observed. So whatever problems we have now in detecting something, one never knows. It's impossible to say. And I believe that science is not democratic, and in fact I believe that science is very capitalistic. It is very capitalistic system where there is a great competition. Some companies grow. They are the ones that produce theories and explain observations, and some pop-ups, they just die off because they go bankrupt. But we can't tell. I mean, you can't tell which one of these modern theoretical undertakings, the outrageous things, which one of them is the equivalent of some backyard garage where Steve Jobs is fiddling with things, and which one is just sort of something that will just go away.
Yes, there is a question. Sorry, there is a question, I think. Yes? Yes.
Actually, there's a question, very brief comment also. I mean, the string theories, I'm not doing string theory at all, but there are no string theorist claims that this is like the new theory of relativity and the rest of the future will be built on it, and we explain everything with it right now, right? So it's a difference. There's a difference between saying, okay, here's a proposition and a bunch of people work on it, and then maybe sometime the future will be disproven. At the moment we cannot disprove it, but I think it's totally fine to make suggestions. But the question was to go back to the last thing that you said, the cultural development. Do you think that part of the problem is, or could be, that we don't know, even the scientists, let's say, we are not aware much anymore in terms of making an argument also against people that say, oh, I can just claim this, and prove me wrong, Could it be that our school and also personal education is lacking a little bit? That the awareness of what it really takes and took to get where we are, to say, okay, look, I can tell you why this and that is. So do you have that feeling, or even is there any evidence? Is this getting discussed? Because I sometimes have the feeling, if I ask myself, I say, yeah, okay, the Earth is going around the sun, but how do I know? Yeah, I mean, let's go to something more complicated, something more contemporary discussed. And sometimes I feel a little bit lacking my own sort of foundation of arguing against someone saying, okay, no, it's this way. And even it seems ridiculous to me, or to many people. I have a hard time, even things that have been already found out like 30 years ago.
Yeah, I think I do agree with you. But people in general do not understand about this method of finding reliable information that we call science, is that it is a process which takes a very long time. And in the media you see science news, that now we discovered this now, stop the press, this changes everything. Black holes live in the white holes. This changes our view of the universe. But this is not how science advances. And you can see that, I mean, these news that you see, they are never followed up. It's not that next week there would be now this great discovery that has changed everything. Now what we think about it today, no, there is another one. No, it's a hologram. The universe is a hologram. this changes everything. And then you ask a week later, now what happened with the hologram? And then there's, no, it's a new one. And this gives people a very distorted view of science. They think science is about instant discoveries, whereas in truth, it's a long, long process. And that's a beautiful example is, of course, the gravitational waves that were just observed. And even there, I mean, people lie. I mean, it was not such a, it was a rocky road. So 100 years ago, Einstein predicted that yes, there could be gravitational waves. Then 1930s, Einstein said, well, they are not there. And people argued, and then people argued that, well, they are there, but they cannot be seen. They don't have any physical existence. And then people argued, and finally, after 50 years, they came to a conclusion, well, maybe they can be observed. And then 50 years, they thought, well, what sort of device should I build? So it's a long process, and I think if we all had a little bit more feeling of this, that how science is a process that takes a very long time to develop and mature, and how many things you need there. We would probably, even the layman would probably understand these, say, contradicting statements and the politicians too, that the scientists make. So the politicians say, why the scientists cannot agree with each other? I mean, it's difficult to do anything because the scientists, even the scientists don't agree. But they don't understand we are people who are paid to disagree. We are paid to be critical. And that's then when the public at large sees this. Even the scientists cannot agree. Well, I have this theory, which I have as it's my theory, and it's my truth. But this is very difficult to explain because if I now try to start to explain gravitational waves, it will take hours and hours and weeks. So it's because science has fallen into its own sword in a way. It's become so successful and so complicated that it starts to go beyond to this realm into some other sphere. I don't know.
Yes, can you please use the microphone? I will try to.
If you want, I can, although I also have a very loud voice.
It's for the camera.
Okay, for the camera. Good.
For prosperity.
For prosperity. I think you said something very interesting, that the people outside of science don't understand what science is. Isn't that our fault? Isn't that we have not been successful to explain why we need all those millions and billions of euros and dollars? My question here, who has learned systematically how to communicate about science to school children, to politicians, to business people? Who gets taught that?
Well, yeah, in a way, but I would disagree, because I mean we are hard pressed even to do the science, and so if on our shoulders you still put this task of communication. Some of us do that, but not all of us want to do it, and let's be honest, not all of us can do it. So I think what we would need really is that the society would somehow, I don't know, put more money into educating science communicators, and of course this is a trend that is going on, and especially if I think when I was a child, some 5-10 years ago, there were many less, and now there are lots of people. But still, it is a difficult task, and maybe the society should do something more. We scientists could try to do more, but I don't think, honestly speaking, our resources will not be enough. It's not I'm saying it's not my fault. It was broken already when I came. That's like Homer Simpson always said. But it is. You touch an important issue, and how to resolve that. That's a good question.
Yeah, and I also think that some people can do it well. Not everyone want to do it, and there should be more resources for doing it. But it's an important. Yes, I agree.
But I think you should also educate people, non-scientists, to communicate about science, and I think that's probably more important in the long run than scientists who are willing to do it, because our number will not grow exponentially. I can promise you that. I mean, given even after Sipilä has left the government, so there must be other people, and they must be educated, and they must be able to do it successfully. And I think there are many, at least in Finland, and I think also elsewhere, there are lots of signs that there is some growth. And
I agree. Yes.
Just a comment to this one. I think the best way to, like, if we use education to disprove something like, let's say, flat Earth or the sun goes around the Earth, why not just teach that in, like, junior high school science classes? You take the problem and you give, like, this is in contradictory to reality in this model, and try to, like, calculate something with it or something like that. I know it's a hassle and a lot of work, but why not?
no, I don't think that works in that way at all. I mean, you have to remember that, let's take schools, high schools, I don't know what they are called these days. It's been a while since I was at school. 90% of the students don't give a damn about physics. And the 10% who do, I mean, you don't need to convert them. They are already here. You are already here. But it's the rest of the people who do not care about physics or science in general. That should be our target. Not the people who do it. I mean, there are people who are interested in science, even if you try to keep them away, locked in their homes, but they are still interested. So I think the real problem is the public at large, where the volume is the largest. So I cannot imagine you taking some sort of 15-year-old young guy listening to hip hop and saying that let's now compute this Newtonian stuff, and I know what they would say, and since there are probably sensitive people here, I don't want to repeat it.
Okay, so more questions? Yes, just wait a second.
Well, yeah. Well, I teach math at a junior high, and I get to answer these questions today, like, why do we need polynomials? Why do we need equations and stuff like that? And I think it's hard to answer those questions on the spot. It's hard to, like, keep some examples. So you have to be really quick on your feet, and these kids, they lose interest in a second. So it's hard. That's my comment.
Yes, I'm sure it is hard, but you should not despair. I mean, if I just make a footnote, so I don't know about education and schools at all, but these days everybody can have an opinion. So let me have my truth. So I have this theory that it would be, when I'm thinking of physics and natural sciences, it probably, math is a bit different, but if I'm thinking of physics and natural sciences, maybe it would be more a better way. Instead of trying to explain to them all these inclined planes, which I hated at school and could never understand, there were also some sticks that were put against walls I never understood. I'm not trying to fool you. I never understood what were these viscosities, and I never understood it really. And then there were these pulleys, these ropes and weights and that sort of thing, which drove me to desperation. But so at worst, at my lowest point, my grade was 5 in physics. So I'm saying that there is hope. There's always hope, and the way that would make and there are those people who like to do these calculations, and they are enthusiastic, and then they graduate and they come here, but the people who do not, I think maybe for them would be just to be more qualitative and tell about the history of science, how Copernicus found this thing, and why we now believe that the Earth goes around the sun, and you can show pretty pictures taken by the Hubble telescope and so on. And I think we are too ambitious in trying to make all young people to be able to solve differential equations or whatever they do. Rather that give them some little inkling, a little spark for science that maybe, maybe there is some idea here. It's not completely foolish. And this is something that I've told many times, maybe not here, when I sort of give public talks, say about cosmology, and it has happened to me 2 times that after the talk, then sometimes people come to me and say thank you, and so on. And then two times, both times it was as this kind of a oldish gentleman. I think it was not the same person, but in different cities, and it came to me and said that what a wonderful lecture. This was so great. It was unbelievably great, and I didn't understand a thing, but it was great. And I think that is perhaps that we should also give this feeling to our students, that they think that there is something here. I might not understand it now, but I might keep an open mind and learn. I might not become a physicist. I might become something more useful, like I don't know, a computer scientist. But still, that people would have this feeling that that science is a huge body that has been built with great effort.
Yes, thank you. So, more questions? Well, I actually, oh, yes, there is one, sorry.
Okay, how about the history of science? Could it be that the window of science being existent and supported by governments is rather short? I mean that if we produce disruptive signals like overpopulation and systemic all kinds of resource depletion and such, and climate change. I would, if I were a politician, I would shut down this difficult source which doesn't fit into my worldview and which kind of explains that I'm playing with wrong cards. So how long can we be favored by politicians and be financed? We are so many, and actually we are being cut down all the time.
Yes, this is this is a good question. It's so good question that I will answer another question. It is, and this is that you might ask yourselves now. So the question: why do we do science? Why is it that we've been doing science for many centuries? And I think the reason for that has been that it's in a way it is a manifestation of the psychological need that we have. We have a curiosity about the world, and if we did not have this curiosity about the world to see how things work, we would not be here. As a species, we've been driven by this curiosity, which then in its sort of a finest form has evolved to become a scientific enquiry. And I think this is true for all people, including politicians, if you can sort of count them in that class of people. So, and you see that if you think about the history, you see that science, what has been the greatest game changer in history, it's been science. It's first especially during the last few hundred years with the scientific revolution, and everything that we now have is based on science. We live in an age of electricity that was discovered and developed by people a little bit less than 200 years ago. And still, of course, politicians still have at the back of their mind that maybe these people who once delivered us everything that the world is now based on, electricity. If you think of that, you take out electricity, what do we have of the modern world? There are no computers, no planes, there is nothing. It's not just the lights, there's nothing absolutely that we would have that we now call modern. But so they think there is some sort of self-serving way, but I also think that even the politicians have in them the idea that doing science is something that raises us above sort of a mediocre. There is this wonderful anecdote. It's a true story from the 60s when one of the director of the Fermilab, which is a particle accelerator in the United States, was called upon to testify at the US Senate. And he was asked that now, I mean, there are all these billions that you have to pay for these accelerators, what good is it? And one senator in particular, like we are now in the United States, and they are very concerned about defense, and he was asking that in what manner has all of this enterprise has contributed to the defense of the United States? How will it in the future, how will it contribute to the defense of the United States? And the response of this guy was wonderful. He said that, sir, it has not contributed to the defense of the United States in any way, and it will not contribute to the defense of the United States in any way. However, it will make it worth defending. And I think this is a sentiment that people generally share. If you think of China, for instance, now you could ask them, why should the Chinese put huge sums of money into science, what they are doing now? Why should they do it in space research, which is basically useless. I mean, it will not increase their trade with anybody. And I think that Chinese, as well as we here in Finland, think that having a society that does science is a value in itself. It gives Chinese do it because it gives them prestige. And you should ask again yourself, why does it give prestige to a nation that does science? Why we think that China, with these scientific endeavors, is a greater nation, like say, I don't know, Zimbabwe. So why we think so? And I think it's because we all think that knowing about things, having knowledge is a value, is an end itself. And this is, we often have these periods that money is scarce and things are difficult, but in the end I'm an optimist, not to the extent as the other guy from Turku, but still I'm slightly optimist that in the end it is faith in science is something that everybody somehow deep down understands that it's a value. It's a great value, even though it does not produce anything tangible.
Well, it's nice that there are still optimists. I think I have to say that I share a lot of concerns about the way in which nowadays we need to justify our fundamental research in order to get funding from national and European funding agencies. I think it's not only here. Maybe this will change, but I did see, and I do see, a trend more and more in the direction of what has a clear and immediate economic impact will be funded with respect to what just has, a fundamental value, or it comes out of intellectual curiosity. So I do share a concern about that. I mean, I think probably this was also what the gentleman was saying here. But it is nice to be optimist. I like it. Good.
But still, if you think of in the 1920s, when quantum mechanics was discovered, a huge discovery, probably one the greatest discovery of the century, together with relativity. I mean, the number of theoretical physicists were probably, I don't know, 1/100th or 1,000th of what there are today. So I rather like to take all of these things as sort of fluctuations, little fluctuations which eventually will average out. And so let's hope so.
Let's hope so, yes. So do we have more questions? So, well, I do have one maybe final question, and then we will conclude, and we will, everybody can come and ask you questions afterward. We will be here around. And this is, do you have any suggestions for scientists, for us scientists, on ways in which we could somehow interact both with these, people, the Earth is flat people, and also perhaps with the politicians when we have this possibility of doing with policymakers in order to, in some way, not convince them, but, discuss about the fact that also fundamental science is important and all these things. So both ways, what are your suggestions? What are the tips that you could give us all somehow to do something?
I would say that it's not important to interact with the flat Earth people. There are so few of them that doesn't really matter. It's not
not only flat Earth, all the rest. If you sum up for the quantum, there is a huge quantum bullshit thing. It's big.
But still, I think let me say this that, and I'm not sure that we can affect the politicians either. Scientists often think that because they are well educated, they are sort of upper strata of the society, if not financially, at least intellectually, that they should have a direct access to politicians, and that they, when they walk in the Ministry of Silly Walks or whatever, and say something that people say, yes, okay, you're a scientist, so okay, let me just write this down what you are saying. And I think that's probably not going to happen, but rather, now the politicians, they are not a breed of their own, and they just reflect the feelings of the people who vote them. So I think we should try to influence more ordinary people. And it is not just saying that you fools, you thought that, you know, I don't know, Earth is not going around the sun, but trying to say that I'm a scientist and science is a great thing, and I sort of superficially I look normal, almost like you, and maybe science is interesting for you too to think about. So I think we should be more visible in the society, not just as those boring people who then are dragged in somewhere to explain that, well, this really cannot work because this Munkelberg's law, and it's a very complicated thing. And so I think this is we get bad press because we appear to be people who spoil all the happiness in the world, and we are always the ones who are skeptical and say that no, it does not work. And if somebody said that my theory is that this is how it goes, and we say no, it doesn't. So I think science should be a natural part of the society and not just some corner where you then drag people out, or where people then come as if from some sort of an inner sanctum of a temple to explain things. Science should be a normal activity, a part of the modern world, which of course naturally it is.
Like our ivory tower.
Well, there is this mentality a little bit, and also when communicating with the lay people, there is sort of a resistance also within science, that there are people who say that, I mean, you can't say this. It's a very complicated thing. I mean, trying to explain some phenomena. You can't say it's a very complicated thing, and when you do it, when you explain it in plain terms, of course you cannot do it properly. And then people say you should not do it at all because you are distorting the picture. You are giving wrong impressions. But I think wrong impressions are better than no impressions at all, because once at least you have then the joy of discovering the right impression.
Yes, one.
Actually, this was very good point that you sorted, that we should educate the ordinary people, that they should vote to those politicians who are more liking science or something. But when I came here, and actually I saw in Europe that the European people, like the ordinary people, like they don't like care about the scientists. Like, for example, if somebody is a professor, like I have tried this thing, that if I say this thing that I'm working with this professor to an ordinary man or people, they will see like this, that, well, you are doing shit, well, it don't care. And well, back in our country or in the developing world, like if you are doing something with science, like they really feel some prestigious thing that yes, he is doing something for the knowledge. But not in Europe. Like Europe does, like the ordinary people, they don't care about the scientists. Like they see this, that they are doing, yes, they are doing, and like we are facilitating ourselves, like we have devices, but they don't think so that who has created these devices. So they just think that, yes, we have paid for this one, and just we are using these mobile phones and everything, and ACs and insulators or something. But I think so that this impact should, if the scientists should be respected all over the globe, so then this respect will be more, I think so, in the developing world.
Yeah, I could guess that you're right in that. I think it's also, well, I think there are many historical reasons and many other reasons too. It has to do with the way where say in the Western world people, what is their self-image of themselves, and that's, I think, is more likely here to people really see them as somebody not willing to bow to authorities, for instance. If a scientist says something to you, people often do not want to agree, because that would be sort of giving away your own freedom of decision. So, but there are many reasons. But I don't think so. I think that. And that was here maybe some decades ago, still maybe before the war, probably maybe after the war too, but we can't turn the clock back. That I don't think we all would like to be respected, and people, we should, when I go back to the hotel, I would like people to throw flowers at me and shout Hosianna, but I don't think that will happen. So we will, because I mean we sort of think ourselves kind of a clever people, so I think we should think of new ways of advocating the values that we feel are correct and worth defending.
Fantastic. So let us thank Professor Kari Enqvist again. This was fantastic.
Thank you very much. Thanks for many good questions.
And I would like now to remind you that we have our last Science Cafe event in December. I don't remember the exact date, but okay. You have our webpage and Facebook page. This will be Professor Rami Vainio talking about nanosatellites, but we will announce it on Facebook and in the other media. Okay, and now we can still, whoever wants can still discuss with Professor Enqvist. The last Science Cafe of this year, of course. Yes. Thank you.
Enemmän jostain fake newsistä ja sen sellaisesta.